Holy Wiremod here with tutorial 19 in the Lewis series, where we're going to be taking a look at the TraceHull and the TraceLine in more depth. Now I do realize that I covered this in prior tutorials covering the weapon sweeps, and yes, I did a very general, just quick overview of them, but here I'd like to go into depth about these and what you can really do. So using the con commands tutorial lastly, we're going to set up a new con command by using con command add. If you're unfamiliar, I recommend watching last tutorial. Now we're going to make a command, and it's going to be called int.info. Int.info is going to be grabbing the information of the entity we're looking at. So that's where we're going to be using the trace as. And this is also to show you that you don't have to use trace in just sweeps. You can use it outside of sweeps with this. You can use it in chat commands as well. But the whole reasoning behind the trace is first we're going to look at the structure of the trace. So this is for the hull trace. So we need a start position. We need an output. We need min s, which is going to be max s, which makes the hull trace different from the line trace, is that the hull trace, instead of line trace, it sends a line directly in front of the player. The hull trace sends a box right in front of the player, right? So the box's positions, like the corners of the box, the opposing corners, are going to be defined by the minimum s and the maximum s. Okay, so then we're going to need a mask, filter. Those are useful in position. We're not going to be using all these, like ignore world, for example. But let's do a basic structure real quick. So we're going to have the shoot position, like we said, and that's going to be defined as the get shoot position of the player. So that's going to tell us where to start. Now we're going to need the end shoot position, and this is going to be the end, of course, where we're going to have actually shoot position, which is going to be your start, plus a line in front of the player, which is going to be defined as this. First we need to get the actual aim vector of the player. So this is going to return a vector which tells us what direction the player is aiming. And then we're going to multiply that by how long we want the line in front of the player. So that's going to be 10,000 units in this case. Alright, so we're going to have a really long line. If you want to make it like 100 units to limit the distance, you can do that too. Okay, so let us then define how our box is going to be, or how big our box is going to be. So we do that with tmin. We're going to put a vector, and then we're going to have 1, 1, and 1. Now this is going to be like saying that we want it in the 1, 1, 1 on the XYZ graph. Now we're going to make it all -10, so instead of 1, 1, 1 here, for those familiar or unfamiliar with vectors, it's now going to become -10, -10, -10 when I multiply by a value of -10. So it's going to set our minimum corner at that position, whereas if we do the maximum variant right here and we remove the negative, now it's going to be +10, +10, +10. So our box is total 20 by 20 by 20 in size, just to give you an idea. So we're going to be sending that box in front of the player 1,000 units. So that's the whole point of this. So let's start with a trace. So we're going to have some variable that we're going to set, no, not until util. We're going to set equal to this TraceHull. Now this input here is a table of information, right? So we're going to have a table, and this table is going to contain all the hull trace structure data, and it's going to send out a trace. So let's then put this right here. We'll say start, and that's going to be the shoot position. Then we're going to have npos, which is going to be the end shoot position. Then we're going to have filter. We don't want it to hit the player that's shooting at the line. The mask. Now the mask is going to be different here. We have a bunch of mask enums, and what this does is going to tell us what mask or the trace should hit. So if we go here, we can make it only hit NPC solid objects, for example. Just waiting for this to load. There we go, NPC solid objects. We can make it only hit opaque objects, that anything that blocks lighting. Make it hit anything that's visible. So you can determine many different factors here. It's really useful to use this. So we are going to say for the mask that we want to do mask, and then we're going to do hull or shot hull. Okay? And for those who are unfamiliar with that specific enumeration, that's going to be here. It's going to be anything that stops a bullet, excluding hitboxes. Okay? So very simple. Almost forgot the comment there. That would have been an error. Then we're going to have the min s, which is going to be the tmin, and the max x, or max s, which is going to be the t max. Alright, so that's going to be everything for this table. And now we need a fail-safe. What if there's nothing found in this box, or for some reason the TraceHull just doesn't work? So we need a condition here. We need to check if the entity that we get, or from here, is going to be valid. So we'll say is valid. Now, how do we get the entity? Well, we can actually get one of the TraceHull results like this, and there's different results you can get. It doesn't have to be entity, though we used entity in the prior tutorial. So, for example, if we go to trace structure, or trace result rather, this is going to say the stuff that we can get, or the data which is going to result from this original TraceHull, okay? So one of the things was the entity, so it's going to be the entity hit by the trace. So we're saying if there is no entity hit by this trace, then we want to do a backup trace, okay? So we're going to then say tr is now equal to, because we defined it up here, so tr is now going to be equal to a trace line. And again, we're going to have a table full of data. So we're pretty much going to be using the same thing, except we're not sending out a hull, or we're not sending out a box, we're sending out a line. So we don't need the max s and min s, as you can see here for the trace structure. It's a little bit different. So now let's go back and we will then define these start position, end position, and all this stuff. So pretty much you need all this from above except for the min s and max s, okay? So I hope that makes sense. And now, since this backup is done, it'll give us a better opportunity. Remember also to end the if statement here. We don't want to forget that. But now this backup is going to ensure that we have something to get the entity in case the first one fails, or the first trace fails. So now let's get some data from our trace. So again, this is going to be all the results from here, or trace result structure. And we can also get different things, such as the hit position. So the hit position is going to give us the position of the entity that we just hit, or we just found. And then we can get other data, like we can get the material type. And I'll load that page and we'll go check it out once we get the results. Alright, so let's go get the position set up. So we have trace and we have hit position. And then we have the material, which is going to be mat type. Alright, so now let's do a final check. Let's make sure, because we have entity defined here, if entity is not valid for whatever reason, or we don't get the right type of entity, for example, we hit the world and we can't really get data from that, then we'll say that we have an invalid entity. And then we'll return and not do anything. Elsewise, actually I believe I have too many ends right here. Whoops. Alright, so elsewise, say it's good to double check your code too. We're going to actually say print, and let's get the entity and display this data to our console. So in order to print an entity, you have to actually convert it to a string like this, or else there's going to be error. And then let's do the same thing for the position. So position, and then we'll have POS, and we don't need this because it's going to be a number output. So we'll say that we need material, and this is going to be the material type. Okay, so again, we'll check the material type in a second. So this is going to be the basic format. Let's go in game and see what happens. Alright, so we're now in game, so let's test out the command on an invalid result. So we'll say this wall right here, type int info, and as you can see in console it says invalid entity. Now if I were to spawn a command, or a buddy, if you recall from our chat commands, there we go. And now let's do the same thing, int info. And as you can see, it presents the entity information. In the console we have the entity name, the position, and the material type of 70, which if we look that up, that's going to be flesh, which the zombie has. So you know that works, and everything's looking good. So anyway, I hope that clears everything up on the TraceLine structure for those who are asking. If you have any more questions, feel free to leave some in the comments below. And if you like the content, feel free to like, subscribe, and share. And I'll see you guys in the next tutorial.